At the auditorium, Zainab stepped back, hands on her waist as she surveyed the half-decorated auditorium with a critical eye. Colorful banners and ribbons adorned the walls, but there was still so much left to do. Ruya, can you call the management office? I think the AC is leaking. We don't want any electrical issues. Ruya said, yeah, good catch. I'll give them a call. As Ruya stepped aside to make the call, Zainab grabbed another armful of ribbon and climbed up on the stepladder to continue decorating the stage. Ruya rejoined her a few minutes later. Call is out of reach now. We will try after some time. Then her eyes swept over the cavernous auditorium. There's still so much left, Zainab. We've been at this for hours. Zainab stifled a sigh as she taped up another bright swathe of fabric. I know, but it all has to be perfect for Professor Alihan's quiz competition tomorrow. Ruya said, why are you doing all this for that rude professor? He doesn't deserve it. Zainab didn't say anything but smiled. Then Ruya said, Z, it's going to be evening soon. We should think about packing up for today. Zainab replied, you can go home, Ruya. But I need to all of this tonight. Raya's brow furrowed with concern. Alone. That's too much work for one person. Let me stick around and help. Zainab said, no, really, I've got this. You've already done so much. I can take it from here. Ruya said, promise me you will reach home as soon as the work is done. Zainab smiled and said, promise. As the night grew, Zainab strained to see the ribbon she was trying to secure, balanced precariously on the tallest step of the ladder. Stretching up on her tiptoes, she gave one final tug to straighten it. But the sudden movement caused the old ladder to wobble dangerously beneath her. With a cry of alarm, Zainab felt herself pitching backwards. Her eyes squeezed shut in fear as she waited for the inevitable impact with the hard floor. But instead of a jarring collision, a pair of strong arms caught her, cradling her slight form securely. Zainab's eyes fluttered open to find herself gazing up into Alihan's face, just inches away. Their eyes locked with electric intensity. Then the spell was broken as Zainab said, sorry, sir, I was just... Seeming to shake himself, Alihan cleared his throat roughly. Yes, well. He carefully set her back on her feet, taking a hasty step backwards. Zainab tucked a stray strand of hair behind her ear, looking anywhere but not at him. The auditorium is nearly ready, sir. With a stiff nod, Alihan turned away and Zainab retreated to the stage. Just then, there was a loud popping sound followed by a bright flare of sparks as the old auditorium AC sputtered and fizzled. Zainab wasn't aware about it. Alihan shouted, look out! In a flash, Alihan reached her side, one hand gripping her arm as he spun and pulled her rapidly against his chest. His other arm came up to protectively shield her head as the sparks rained down around them. Heart pounding wildly, Zainab found herself enveloped in his solid embrace, tucked into the safety of his powerful frame. Alihan asked, are you all right, Miss Yilmaz? She nodded shakily, still reeling from the scorching sparks in Alihan's close, shielding embrace. Yes, sir. I'm okay, she replied. He seemed to study her face for a moment longer, then he said, one moment. He strode over to the supplies and grabbed a water bottle, handing it to her. Their fingers brushed ever so slightly in the exchange. Hakan sat at a dimly lit bar. His face was drawn with frustration. He had been gambling for hours, and his luck had run out. The cards and dice had not been in his favor tonight, and now he found himself in a precarious situation. As the last hand was dealt, Hakan watched helplessly as his final chips were swept away by the grinning man across the table. His pockets were empty, and his debt had grown insurmountable. The man who had just won leaned back, a smug expression on his face. What happened, bro? You were on such a roll, and now you've lost a huge amount to me. Hakan's hands trembled as he struggled to find his words. I don't know how I can pay you back. Give me some time at least. The man's smile vanished, replaced by a cold, hard stare. He leaned forward, his eyes boring into Hakan's. Okay, you have 2 days. Bring the money to me, or I will kill you. And you know how much I mean my words. Hakan's heart pounded in his chest, fear tightening its grip around him. He knew the man wasn't bluffing. Desperation gnawed at him as he nodded weakly. I understand. I'll get the money. The man leaned back, satisfied with Hakan's compliance. Good. Don't disappoint me. She tugged her arms tighter, suppressing a shiver as the chill from the malfunctioning AC seeped into the room. Alihan noticed her movement. I think the temperature is dropping due to the short-circuit malfunction. We should leave. Hugging her arms around herself for warmth, Zainab nodded her agreement. But when they reached the auditorium's main doors, Alihan's powerful tug didn't budge. He tried again with a grunt of effort, to no avail. What the? He turned towards Rayhan with a dark scowl. We're locked in. A spike of fear lanced through her. Zainab asked, What? How? A muffled snicker came from the other side, followed by a voice calling out mockingly. Have a good night, lovebirds. Hey, Alihan's commanding shout anger made her jump. Is someone out there? We're stuck inside. Open this door. He pounded his fist against the unrelenting door. Another snide laugh. Not a chance, Professor. This is way too juicy. Zainab could only gape in disbelief and mortification as the prankster's receding snickers faded away. Her eyes darted back to Alihan, whose expression was thunderous. Alihan softly said, Don't worry, Miss Yilmaz. I'll have the authorities deal with this contemptible joke. He pulled out his phone to call security, but the battery was dead. He asked, Where's your phone? Zainab replied, It's in the locker room. Alihan made a disappointed expression. Only eerie silence answered his bellows. Zainab shivered again, this time not just from the cold. Don't worry, someone will come looking for us, Alihan said, though his jaw was tight with anger and frustration. He shrugged off his suit jacket. Here. Before Zainab could protest, he draped the jacket around her slender shoulders. The fabric was still warm from his body heat. She shot him a startled look, but his attention was already elsewhere as he scanned the auditorium. He exhaled a harsh breath. It doesn't matter. We're trapped here until morning at least. The auditorium had grown uncomfortably cold. After ascertaining there was no way to get any help, Alihan settled himself on the floor, back against the wall. He met her eyes briefly before dropping his gaze. After a momentary hesitation, Zainab slowly lowered herself to the ground beside him, leaving a careful space between their bodies. She clutched the jacket more tightly around herself, feeling awkwardly hyper-aware of Alihan's solid presence next to her. Neither spoke, but the weighted silence. As the night wore on, Zainab's exhaustion from the long day of decorating eventually overwhelmed her. Despite her best efforts, her eyelids grew heavier and heavier. At some point, her head fell sideways until it came to rest tentatively against Alihan's shoulder. Alihan remained frozen, afraid even to breathe too deeply as Zainab's cheek nestled more firmly against his bicep. As he looked at her strangely, his mother's gentle voice echoed through his mind from years ago saying, Alihan, if a girl ever rests her head on your shoulder, never let her down. It is a woman's secret way of trusting you with her vulnerability. He swallowed hard against the lump in his throat as studied Zainab's peacefully slumbering features. Despite his callous treatment of her, despite all his efforts to keep her at arm's length, she had placed her trust in him in this moment. Alihan's expression softened minutely as he looked at her relaxed expressions. He maintained his arms as it is, not wanting to awaken her. He smiled and whispered, You are safe here, Miss Yilmaz. From now on, I won't tease you anymore. Sleep well. Morning, Zainab stirred slowly, blinking away the heavy vestiges of sleep. As her surroundings came into focus, she registered the hard floor beneath her. Disoriented, she pushed herself upright and saw Alihan was beside her. He was slumped against the wall opposite her, head tipped back and eyes closed in slumber. A flush crept up Zainab's neck as hazy memories trickled back, resting her head against his shoulder, the solid warmth of him beside her through the long night. She scooted back hastily, putting distance between them as her flush deepened. As she moved, something warm and weighty slipped from her shoulders. Glancing down, Zainab realized it was Alihan's jacket, the one he'd draped over her while she shivered. She bit her lip, studying the rugged fabric with a tentative smile. Perhaps he wasn't quite the hard-hearted brute she'd taken him for. Despite their prickly history, he had clearly looked after her welfare last night. Slowly, she lifted the jacket and draped it around him while he was sleeping. But as she leaned forward, a small book tumbled from the pocket and landed on the floor with a muffled thud. Zainab's froze, eyes flicking between the fallen object and Alihan's slumbering form. Her fingers had just caught the cracked leather cover when Alihan stirred with a low rumble. Panicked, Zainab snatched her hand back and quickly shoved the little book into her bag, praying he hadn't noticed. Miss Yilmaz. Alihan's deep voice was still rough with sleep as he roused groggily. What happened? Zainab was out of words to explain.